Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So today I am back to do another seasonal book recommendations video. We've done summer, we've done autumn, we've done winter, and now finally it is time for spring. I always enjoy more of a transitional season. I love autumn most of all, but spring is my birthday month. I'm a 21st of March baby, so first day of spring. I love that things are brightening up. I love seeing the flowers. I love wearing florals. Florals for spring. Groundbreaking. Though I don't particularly love the startings of my hay fever. Fingers crossed that this year I just have my regular symptoms and not what I got last year, which was basically conjunctivitis-like symptoms, but without it actually being conjunctivitis, which lasted for 2 months. Doctors didn't know, optician didn't know. The eye doctor at the hospital just said, well, you know, leave it be, and if it goes away in a month or so, then it's probably hay fever. I was like, that's very, very helpful and reassuring, but it did go away by July, so I guess it was hay fever after all. But you know, not very reassuring. Bedside manner left something to be desired, I'm not gonna lie. But that is not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to talk about books that make me feel like spring. So without much further ado, let's just get into these recommendations. The first one that I absolutely had to mention, of course, is Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. This was a series that I'd always been kind of reluctant to pick up because I'm not really very much into like countryside narratives. There's something about books that are set in the countryside that I just instantly turn my brain off to. You know, I grew up around the countryside. I grew up adjacent to farms, though not on a farm myself, and for whatever reason it's just kind of repelled me. I'm always much more interested in like a school narrative, in a city narrative, but on the recommendation of my friend Rachel, I did eventually start reading Anne of Green Gables and instantly fell in love. Young Anne Shirley, who ends up being fostered by the Cuthbert family who live in Avonlea. She's very lively, a bit of a chatterbox, very imaginative, and so she absolutely revels in this landscape, in living in the countryside, in making up stories, making friends, making enemies, having all sorts of misadventures along the way, and it is just so heartwarming. I know a lot of people probably see Anne of Green Gables as being more of an autumnal book, because to paraphrase, there is a line about how wonderful it is to live in a world with Octobers, but I don't know, I just always think of spring with this book. Next up, I had to pick a Regency romance, obviously, and the one that came to mind straight away was The Wallflower Wager by Tessa. I'm a big fan of Tessa, and this book follows Penelope Campion, who is a massive animal lover. In fact, she has a bit of a makeshift menagerie in her house, which is disrupting the neighbours. So when the rakish Gabriel Duke moves in next door, determined to fix up his property and be able to sell it off, he realises that Penelope and her animals are an obstacle to that. Nobody wants to live next door to her because of her animals. And so he strikes a deal with her. She will only sell her animals as long as he can promise excellent homes for them all, where these animals are going to be loved and cherished and treated as they deserve. And so they end up spending a lot of time in each other's company, and of course romance starts to bloom. Once again, even though we are in the ton, even though we are in London, the fact that she does have all of these farmyard animals makes me think of farms, makes me think of spring, makes me think of the countryside, a little countryside oasis within London, and it is just very sweet. An obvious classic for this season is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Young Mary Lennox, who moves from India to Yorkshire upon the death of her parents, living in the house of her uncle, who is very aloof and rarely visits the house, discovering family secrets, but also uncovering the key to her late aunt's garden, which she loved so very much but has fallen into disrepair following her death. Mary coming to look after this garden, nurturing not just it but all of those around her. Relationships are reawakened, warmth and sunshine is brought back into the house. It is just this beautiful coming of age book, not just for Mary but other characters who I will not spoil. I actually grew up with the 1993 film, I think it is. As a kid, I came to the book when I was around about 18 and was really charmed by it, and so it had to be included. Maybe a bit of a rogue one, but a book that I do associate with the spring, even though it probably doesn't sound quite right, is Brooklyn by Colm Toibin. There's a real coming of age narrative in this. A young woman really coming into her own when she moves far away from her family. You know, all these springtime themes of growth, rebirth, blossoming into the person that you're meant to be. So yes, for me, Brooklyn is definitely a spring book. And also I had to mention it because the sequel, the long-awaited sequel, is coming out in the summertime, so I feel like spring is the perfect opportunity to read this or reread it. And then the final book that I had to mention, going back to Regency and going back to coming of age, is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. My favourite retelling of Pride and Prejudice, coming from the perspective of Mary Bennet. We get a real timeline of Mary's life. We see a little bit of before the events of Pride and Prejudice, we see the events of Pride and Prejudice from Mary's perspective, and then we see years after and how Mary copes with the death of her father, how that throws her and her remaining family into disarray, and she's pushed on a separate journey, how out of necessity she ends up being pulled away from her core unit, her core family, and ends up having to come more into herself, going from being a young girl into being a woman, how being around different family members actually brings out the best in her, makes her more confident, and of course she finds love along the way. I love this because it's a Jane Austen retelling, but it actually feels, in terms of the writing, like it is just a continuation of Jane Austen's writing. There are other Jane Austen retellings I've read that feel very distinct. They do feel like retellings. This just feels like Jane Austen had kept on writing, which I think takes a lot of skill to be able to do. But Janice Hadlow really delivers with this book, and it shines a light on a character who is often mocked, who is often not taken very seriously, not just by the reader, but by, characters within the book, and allows her a little moment to shine. And yes, Mary is definitely a late bloomer, but as we learn from Mulan, the flower that blooms in adversity is the rarest and most beautiful of all. But there we go, those are 5 little book recommendations for the springtime. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, please let me know any recommendations that you have particularly for spring. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.